Welcome to the Success Story Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Clary. On this podcast, I have candid interviews with execs, celebrities, politicians, and other notable figures, all who have achieved success through both wins and losses, to learn more about their life, their ideas, and their insights. I sit down with leaders and mentors and unpack their story to help pass those lessons on to others through both experiences and tactical strategy for business professionals, entrepreneurs, and everyone in between. Without further ado, another episode of the Success Story Podcast. All right. Thanks again for joining me. I am sitting down with Matt Rizzetta, who is the founder and CEO of N6A Agency, otherwise known as N6A. It is one of the leading public relations firms in the United States. Matt founded the firm out of his basement in 2010, and over the past decade has built N6A into one of the fastest growing PR firms in the United States. Under his leadership, N6A has been named as one of the 50 most powerful agencies in the United States by The Observer, PRWeek's Best Places to Work, and as one of Entrepreneurs Magazine's top company cultures in America. To this day, N6A remains 100% founder-owned and operated and has never taken any outside capital. Rizzetta is known for being one of the most innovative leaders in the area of public relations, marketing, and corporate culture. He is the leader behind N6A's Pace Points program, which is the first employee incentive program that enables employees to customize their rewards, and the outcome relations model, which has challenged the public relations category head-on by aligning PR with KPIs, specific business needs, outcomes, not just high level. So he's really delivering for brands. Rizzetta is the author of 2 books: The Death of Irrelevant PR, Outcome Relations is the New Public Relations, and Embrace the Pace, the 100 most exhilarating lessons learned in a decade of entrepreneurship. Rizzetta serves on the board of trustees at the Marketing Edge and on the Alumni Board of Directors at his alma mater, Iona College. He resides in Westchester County, New York, with his wife and 3 daughters. Thank you so much for joining me, Matt. I really appreciate the chat. I'm excited to sort of unpack your career, what you're doing at N6A, and dive into you dive into the book, 100 Most Exhilarating Lessons. I'm a big fan of it, and I like how you framed sort of your experience, because every podcast I ask people for life lessons. This is basically a book of life lessons. Excuse me. But yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I appreciate the background, and I've been a big fan of the programs for a long time, so it's an honor to be here.
I appreciate you coming on. And before we speak about N6A, and before we speak about some of the lessons that you've learned over building one of the best and most profitable and fastest growing prolific PR firms in the U.S. in the States, let's speak about your career. So walk me through the Matt Rizzetta origin story.
So just I grew up about 20 miles or so north of New York City. I went to Mamaroneck High School. I guess I would describe my childhood as idyllic. I had 2 great parents. They complemented each other perfectly. My dad was more of the pragmatic, kind of disciplined one, a man of integrity and principles. My mother was a little bit more of the dreamer. She really taught me how to dream. She was very inspirational. She really believed in me. And they both together shared an unconditional love and support for me. I had a developmentally disabled sister as well. And it was just a great balance of pragmatism and idealism. That was my background. And both parents, were very present in my childhood. Then you throw in my grandparents into the mix, who were also very present in my life, hardworking immigrants, never really spoke our language. They made incredible sacrifices for future generations like myself and parents. And they were also very present in my childhood. We wound up naming our company then after my grandparents, N6A Agency, after North 6th Avenue, which is the street to which they immigrated. And anyway, it was just a great childhood. It was filled with lots of love, food, support. And it really built a nice foundation for me to dream and to aspire to build something later in life. Obviously, when I launched N6A, a lot of that had to do with the lessons I learned.
And was N6A the first thing you did? Did you work for companies before, or were you just like, head first, I want to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to start this, and it was successful? Because most entrepreneurs I speak to, they've had a lot of, they've screwed up a lot of shit before they get something that works, or, they've worked in a company that I can't work for somebody. So what's the story of, your professional background?
Yes, I got out of, you mentioned I went to Iona College, which was about 5 minutes from where I grew up. Got out of college, had been used to working hard my whole life. I was an amateur boxer in college. I worked, jobs throughout college. So I was kind of used to hard work. And once I graduated, my goal was really to become a sports agent. By the way, I know you just interviewed a sports agent from CAA.
I did, yeah, yeah.
Had my dream job as whatever 10, 15 years ago, and that's what I wanted to do. So I got a job out of Iona, working for Sony BMG. I worked a 9 to 5 in the marketing department. I would take the train down to Midtown Manhattan, fight my way through Midtown traffic and up to Sony BMG's office on the 43rd floor. And I worked in the marketing department 9 to 5. Then literally I would rush home, and from the hours of about 7 p.m. to like 2 a.m. every night, I would represent athletes. I would try to get them jobs overseas, basketball players. We also represented some entertainers as well. And my goal was really just to build a client base and a revenue stream where I could afford to go out and do that on my own full time. Anyway, I learned some hard lessons along the way, like many young entrepreneurs do. Being a sports agent, at least, my experience wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. But through those lessons, it taught me a lot about how to build a business, taught me a lot of lessons about how to serve, how to operate in a services environment. And then 4 or 5 years later, when I started N6A, I took a lot of those lessons with me to start.
1 second. I'm just I'm gonna clip it, so don't worry about that. I just wanted to get my background lighting going. I forgot to get my whole It's early for me. You have to give me a break, man. It's very early.
Leafs blue.
Yeah. Well, listen, I can change it too. But right now it's Maple Leafs blue. That's not my team. Don't worry. But it's like I think they have about the same winning streak as the Rangers right now. No one's doing that hot in the original 6. So
there you go.
Very good. So that does tee it up. So you worked in marketing. You worked as an agent. Now, what made you want to go into PR? And what was the first iteration of N6A?
Yeah, so fast forward then about 4 or 5 years later, after my failed experience trying to be a sports agent. I was 26, 27 years old. My wife was a public school teacher in Brooklyn at PS 205. I had moved on to another agency or two, kind of was working my way up the corporate ranks in PR and marketing. And I got the entrepreneurial bug. I just, like many entrepreneurs, I looked at the agency environment and I just thought I could do it a little bit better. My naivety and my stubbornness kind of brought me to start the business. I'll never forget, it's in my book. The first lesson is never forget your survival days. I'll never forget January 29th, 2010. I just turned 27 years old. I'm sitting there at a diner in Yonkers, New York, with my wife, who was about 7 months pregnant at the time with our first daughter, Iona. We now have 3. And I literally was, begging and pleading with her to let me start my own firm, N6A. And she looked me in the eye and she said, Matt, she said, I believe in you. I believe in the vision, and she let me do it. And we started the agency the next day out of my basement. I had no money, I had no income, we had no clients. My wife was on maternity leave, so literally had zero money. And the rest is history. We started it out of our basement, just worked our butts off. And then here we are 10 years later. We've been in business for a decade. We've had a really great run. Never taken any outside capital, as you mentioned. And it's just been a great, great journey. But it all started, right there in a Yonkers diner 10 years ago with a crazy plea I made to my wife.
That's risky, to say the least. that's not some people when they start a business, it's a little bit safer if they have like a great income, or they're a little bit more comfortable, or their wife isn't 7 months pregnant and they're on maternity leave. So that is very risky. So walk me through as you built your business. I understand at a high level what PR does, but let's just tee it up for people. When you say you're a PR firm, what problems are you actually solving? What's your niche that N6A solves for?
Well, what we're trying to do is historically PR has kind of lived as this footnote, Scott, in the marketing stack, where it's been very difficult for brands to measure, right? And brands kind of feel like they need a PR firm or they need some sort of PR presence, but they're not really sure why. They just know that they need to be positioned in a certain way in the marketplace. Obviously, brand perception, especially nowadays, is incredibly important, probably more important than it's ever been. but it's always been very difficult to trace the value of PR to some sort of tangible business outcome. That's where our model is a little different, and we're really focused on helping brands actually align PR with a specific business outcome. That business outcome could be a revenue outcome like a lead. It could be a recruiting outcome, getting talent to want to work at your company. It could be an M&A outcome, transactionally speaking. It could be a liquidity event in the form of an IPO. It could be a competitive outcome where you're just getting, your butt kicked for whatever reason by your competition and you need to leapfrog them. So that's what our model is focused on. It's really kind of tangible, measurable PR aligned with business outcomes, not PR just for the sake of PR.
And do you find that has been somewhat of a, like, are you sort of paving the way in that regard? Like, you are one of the main firms that actually does that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you go into a meeting with the CMO, and CMO's meeting with tons of PR firms and PR professionals, and every one of them is telling them that they need PR because they have to invest in their brand, but they're not making business for it. We're going into those meetings and we're saying, you need PR not because you just have to invest in your brand, but you need PR because we're going to fight for it on the P&L. We're going to demonstrate, where it's going to lead to incremental outcomes, right, on the P&L. So that, that really has kind of differentiated us in many respects. It didn't just happen overnight. I mean, it was a 10-year journey for us. And at about year 6 or 7 in the journey, the light bulb went off and we were sitting in front of our buyers, CMOs, VPs of marketing, CEOs, and they were like, yeah, PR is great, but how can we show that it demonstrates some kind of business value? And that's when we started to go through the rigor and discipline of trying to create a model. Again, with PR, PR in our mind is the most valuable asset in the marketing stack because it's credibility. PR is credibility, right? And you can't do anything without credibility if you're a brand. You can't recruit talent, you can't sell your company, you can't sell your products. So our argument was that PR is the most valuable component of the marketing stack. It just wasn't getting the credit it deserved because these PR practitioners weren't finishing the race for their clients. They weren't taking the credibility assets and then aligning them with some sort of business outcome. So that's been our approach, certainly over the past 3 or 4 years, and we found it to be successful.
So I appreciate that, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's also very important in the age of transparency and the age of cancel culture and all of these things that are going on, that businesses are very much above board and in line and in sync with what the market is saying. Because if you're not, social media is a mother right now. Like, they don't give you much mercy, right? So, and we're seeing that more and more, especially what we're living through right now. And that's a whole other conversation. And it's a great point. But I also really want to dive into I'll let you decide, but I would love to go into some of the actual tangible lessons that you've built out, because when I actually read your book, that's where I saw a ton of value. But I was just curious, because you're in it. Do you have any thoughts on, like, best practices for businesses that are trying to understand and climatize and acclimate to this cancel culture? All this social media pressure to do this thing, that thing. It seems like every day there's a new thing that businesses are supposed to be doing to stay in touch and in tune and sensitive to topical issues. So how do businesses sort of ride this wave? Because it's very difficult, I find. I saw, we're speaking about obviously George Floyd protests and how businesses are dealing with that. And I saw something that was just horrible. There was these influencers overseas. I don't know if there were any in North America, but they were in solidarity of the Black community, painting blackface on themselves. And it was just like this, basically a PR disaster. And like, that's what I think businesses don't understand. They don't understand how to deal with all of these trending topics. They're not agile enough. And then you saw these influencers. This is just like, obviously, the worst possible case of trying to do something positive, but the outcome being negative. And it's just a point that I read last night. That's why it's top of mind. It was just insane that I saw that. And people actually thought that was okay. But how do businesses keep up with all of the social pressures? As a PR firm, what would you recommend they do? I guess hire a PR firm, but yeah.
I think, Scott, I think the first thing is you have to stay true to your core values, and you have to live and breathe those values in the form of actions, right? Not in the form of words. And I think that that's sort of the golden rule for businesses, I believe. And to your point, I've been running a business for over a decade now. And look, it's a lot. There's a lot more peer pressure. Everything is under a microscope. Everything is much more public in terms of how you're managing a business now than it was a decade ago. So, my advice and counsel to business leaders right now is just to stay true to your core values. I think corporations, to your point earlier, corporations can be a platform for impact and change. And I think it's on corporations to do their part to impact change by doing, just by saying. And if you're a corporation, I can just speak to our company at N6A, Scott. Corporations can do in three ways. There's three ways I think they can do. Number one is through time. Number two is through knowledge, and then number three is through money. And I think it's incumbent on corporations to do their part, in each one of those areas. Time is, at least in the services business, time is our most valuable resource, right? So we can donate, if we can give our time to impacting social change, that's part of the responsibility, I believe, of a corporate citizen today. Number two is knowledge. So all of us as corporate leaders, on behalf of our entities, can lend something to help impact change in the form of knowledge. My business's domain is PR and marketing services, so we have a specialized skill that we can contribute in some way to impact social change via our knowledge of marketing or PR or whatever it is. And then money, which obviously depends on the size and scale of the operation, but in some way, shape, or form, I think to the extent that companies can contribute their financial resources to impacting change, they should do that. And that's been our whole thing, not just with the recent environment in which we're operating, but all along over the past 10 years, I always said to our employees, Scott, we really want to be a company that backs up our words with actions. We don't want to be a company that just says things. We want to be a company that does things.
That's important. Yeah.
Sometimes we have to, avoid the temptation of peer pressure and to be the first one to post on Instagram or LinkedIn. But we're going to be the first ones to meet as a team and discuss how we're going to do things to actually impact change. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think that's a smart way to look at it, because I think there's a lot of thinking through a lot of these things that companies are doing are knee jerk and they're not actionable. So it's all great to talk on social and be the loudest, but in 6 months, what change have you actually invoked in your organization or for the community? I appreciate that. I don't want to go too much into that, but I just think it's relevant because that's what you do. So I think that it's something that if somebody's listening and they're in a business environment, I think it's valuable to understand from one of the leading PR firms experts' point of view, is like those points you mentioned, but be in line with what your core values are. But there's other ways that you can contribute, but make sure that there's actually an action, an outcome. It's not just a superfluous or like high level or a vanity action, right? You want it to be true and impactful.
I'd rather be the company, to that point. I'd rather be the company that you never hear about that does things than the company you always hear about that does not.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Okay, so let's break down some of the points in this book, because, and I want to say this, when somebody writes a book, a lot of people write books. Books are great. A lot of people write books, but sometimes it feels very salesy if I speak too much about the book on the podcast. And that's honest. And I don't like speaking too much about the book. I rather pull out the value in the individual. And then if they've written a book, like people are listening or watching, whatever, they can go get that book, and that's cool. But I really do want to focus on some of the things that you've mentioned in the book, because the book is literally a list of lessons that you've learned over your career. So I don't care if you had written it in a book or not. I still want to get that out of you, because that's what you've lived, and those are the struggles that you've dealt with. So I guess there's a few really, really strong points that I really enjoyed. One of them being working for your eulogy, not your resume. That's a very strong statement. What does that mean? In your words, how can people use that to impact their own career, their own business?
Sure. So Scott, eulogy over resume is one of the lessons, one of the 100 lessons in the book, as you mentioned. And I learned that one, and it's one of the most meaningful ones to me, in my entrepreneurial journey. I learned that one, it was about 2014, 2015. I was about 4 or 5 years into N6A at the time. And first off, you got to understand, where I come from. And I mentioned my upbringing and my background. And, I was very blessed growing up to have a family that totally supported and loved me. And I was really showered with all of, this amazing unconditional love. But, we never, and my wife too, we never had generational money, so to speak. And so this N6A entrepreneurial journey, when we were making some good money the first couple of years in business, we achieved success, I would say pretty quickly in our journey. So around 2014, 2015, we were approached by some firms, larger firms and strategic investors that, wanted to buy us or invest in us in some cases, and financially would have represented a significant, really life-changing event. I wouldn't have been Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, but, for where I came from, it was certainly life-changing money. It would have changed the trajectory of, my family, my children. And it was the first time in my career where I was dealing with something like that. And obviously it's a good thing, right? Because it kind of validates that you've built a great business and other people now are looking to invest or buy the firm. So obviously that was incredibly, exciting for me, but it also created this, almost identity crisis, because I loved the business and I didn't just want to give the business up and, become a vice president to the senior vice president to an executive vice president to the COO. And, that just wasn't really something that I was incredibly, motivated by at the time. So I had these two things pulling at me. One was the lure of financial security, and the other was the fact that I would have to give the business up and our identity and, all of that. And at that time, as I was literally, it was like a sign from above in my mind. At that time, I heard a TED talk by a author you might have heard of named David Brooks. And David Brooks was talking about in his TED talk the concept of people who live for their eulogies and people who live for their resumes, two different types of people. And the vast majority of people tend to live for their resumes, where they're living to set the next job up, the next opportunity up. And then there's a rare minority of people that live for their eulogy, where they live not to set the next job up, but they're living today based on how they want to be remembered when everything is said and done. And he was talking about it in much more of a spiritual kind of personal context. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, I sort of applied it to my business journey. But I remember hearing that speech, and it really changed my life. And I remember saying, that's how I want to run my business. I want to run my business based on the eulogy, based on how we're going to be remembered when all is said and done. We don't want to be a brand that just kind of fades into oblivion. And unfortunately, that comes with some really difficult sacrifices and decisions. In my case, it's been turning down the lure of, investment capital and, and money many times. But, I believe it's the right thing to do. And, when I'm old and gray, sitting on a porch somewhere and, smoking a cigar or whatnot, I really want people to remember our company for having built something of significance that doesn't just fade into oblivion. And that's kind of the eulogy concept. And I think we've been pretty true to that. Obviously, it's always difficult to live and breathe that every second. You kind of have to remind yourself that you're in it for the eulogy. But, I think we've done a pretty good job as an organization of living that as much as we possibly can.
I love that. And I think that, it does something else. And you mentioned live for your eulogy, not your resume. I also think that that's more of a long-term vision. Obviously, that's a silly thing to say, but it's more of a long-term vision. But that long-term vision, what I mean by that is it's driving an authentic outcome over the long term, as opposed to a short knee-jerk reaction to a potential upside. You're doing something for some longevity, right? If you live for your eulogy, if you live for what you're passionate about, if you take that and you compound it over years, trust you will have that resume portion as well. You will have success. But I think that keeping that in mind, I think that sort of frames up how you should focus all your efforts, all your initiatives. They should be long-term, and they should be something that you aren't trying to capitalize on in the short term. And I think that almost runs counter, unfortunately, to a lot of the way business is done today. But I think that the people that are most successful and happiest are people that have that patience and do look towards building something long-term that they can enjoy. Whereas if you have that, I think it's been propagated by Silicon Valley, short-term returns, high ROI, get in, get out quick, make 10x what you put in. That mentality is toxic to a lot of entrepreneurs. And that mentality, not every entrepreneur, of course, it's nice to have a big exit, of course, but it's not the reality for most people. It's like if you look at the subset of entrepreneurs that actually last 10 years, it's very small, and the ones that turn into unicorn exits, it's like it's infantile. Like, go buy a lottery ticket. It's much easier than starting a company. It's going to go turn into a unicorn. So yes. I think that having that mindset just sort of frames your expectations of the work and the effort that you have to put in. Because if you work for your eulogy, then you're no longer, again, it's the age old saying, like, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? But it's the same thing. You're just taking it long term. And I like how you framed it, because it's not only it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but it's not short term, it's long term and meaningful.
Yeah. No, Scott, I totally agree with that. In fact, those, you're speaking to a couple other lessons in the book. And by the way, I just want to preface this by saying that the book is 100 lessons learned, which implies that I made mistakes. I mean, I made mistakes to learn all 100 of these lessons. So
yeah.
About the eulogy approach, when I was 26 or 27 years old, I got punched in the face a lot along the way to learn these lessons. But you nailed it. I mean, look, and these are other lessons in the book. I think consistency and longevity are the most overlooked qualities in anyone's career. And that's another lesson that I've learned the hard way. I've been surrounded, I've been blessed to have been surrounded by so many clients and friends in my network that have had really successful exits, short-term exits. And it took me about 9 or 10 years to realize this, but that doesn't necessarily define success in one's career. I've seen a lot of companies have short-term successful outcomes, successful quarters, successful years, hit the perfect, timing when it comes to tech bubbles and VC capital investment. And in their own right, they've had incredibly successful outcomes, but that's not necessarily, in my mind, what would define a successful career. I think the ones that have achieved consistent longevity, consistent success, incremental improvements, and they've done that year over year over year over year for a very long time and played the long game. In my mind, those have been the ones that have been the most successful. And that's kind of been my experience. The other thing on that is I have 3 words that I found are the sexiest in the business, in the entrepreneur dictionary over 10 years. Number 1 is discipline. Number 2 is incrementalism. And number 3 is accountability. And the reason I say that they're sexy is because they seem like the least sexy words, right? Like when you talk about discipline, people want to vomit. When you talk about incrementalism, a lot of people don't even know what that means. And then when you talk about accountability, that sounds like coach speak, but it doesn't sound like it's actually practiced. But as I've learned in my journey, the entrepreneurs who are disciplined, they have a rigor in place, they study, they put the time in, they put the road work in, they truly focus on bringing a level of discipline and rigor to the way they operate their businesses, are the ones that are able to achieve the most long-term success. The ones that focus on incrementalism too. It's not about, you can't go from being, a new entrepreneur to a great entrepreneur overnight. The way you go from being a new entrepreneur to a great entrepreneur is through incrementalism. It's through making incremental progress. It's through holding yourself accountable, looking in the mirror, plugging holes, doing that year after year, day after day. And over time, you'll build a really special career. And then, along those lines, accountability too. It's on me. I'm running our business. Ultimately, every decision that the business makes, in some way, shape, or form, is a reflection of me. It rolls up to me. And that's true of all entrepreneurs out there. And they need to be very comfortable with that level of accountability. If you hire somebody and that person makes a mistake, well, guess what? By extension, you are accountable because you hired that person. And it took me a little bit of time to get comfortable with that level of accountability, but I think it's really important anyway. Those are sort of the three sexiest terms in my mind, and it runs counter to what a lot of entrepreneur books might tell you, but that's been my experience. Discipline, incrementalism.
I think those are great. I think those are, and the way you explain them are I think that sort of frames up why they're so important. That's actually a word that I've never heard used before. Incrementalism. So when you say it, it makes sense, but I've never actually used it. I've never heard it used as a word that describes like the way you should approach business. So it's a very valid. I like that a lot. I like that word a lot. I'm going to start using that, to be honest. I'm going to take that because you always hear about, the passion and, the grit and all these other types of like entrepreneurial words, but incrementalism, it tees it up. I just say it because I've just never heard it. And that's why I love it, because it's about framing expectations. And if you can frame expectations as an entrepreneur properly, suddenly the whole process doesn't seem so scary. And I think that that's probably the best takeaway even in both of these. The sort of the same thread is like patience. It's patience and understanding and celebrating the small wins, baby steps, incrementalism, working for the long term, like all these things. I'm starting to see a theme that is what's driving the success. And I think that some entrepreneurs, if I look at the people that I know and they're not tech entrepreneurs or they're not marketing entrepreneurs, they could sell a very boring product. They could sell, and I did air quotes because it's their life, but I mean they could be selling something like I don't know, like just like a very like nothing too sexy. And if they stick with it and they celebrate the small wins and they manage that for 10 plus years, you start to see that they have massive amounts of success. And it's just because they've kept with it over X period of time, and they didn't expect anything, anything monumental. And I'm speaking about like very, tactile widgets. Like if you're selling, for example, I used to work for a guy who sold phone systems. I used to work in telecom, and he sold phone systems, and he did that for like 20 years, and now he's massively successful, very, very happy. But it was just like, it was grind. It was grind. And he did that for his, for 20 years since he graduated university. And he's a really, really smart individual, but there was no major wins there. It was like he writes about some of the struggles and the stresses, and he didn't frame it in the term, incrementalism or any of the things that you're mentioning now. But it's definitely a common thread with a lot of people that have seen success over like, X period of time.
Yeah, no, it's so true. That's so right. I remember, Scott, just to put that into context, I remember when I started N6A, I have the business plan that I developed when I started N6A, and I look back on it once a year just as actually the same day on N6A day, January 29th, the day we decided to start our firm. I look back at the business plan and I kind of laugh because I look at the superlatives I used to develop the business plan when I was 26 years old. Like these were the words I used that I thought were going to define success. It was sprint, it was fast, it was quick. And really, when I was 26 or 27 years old starting our firm, I was, naive, and I believed that we were just going to achieve immediate success. We were going to flip it. We're going to get it. It was totally the resume over the eulogy mindset at that age. And now I look back at that 10 years later and I laugh because when all is said and done, when my career is over, I want to be defined by consistency and longevity. I don't really care if people, I don't really care about short sprints and, having a really successful outcome over a quarter or a given year. I want people to look back at my career and say, that was a guy who did things the right way. He learned from his mistakes. He achieved success on a consistent basis year after year, got better, improved incrementally. And I'll be good with that. Over the course of, I'm 37 years old, over the course of, the next 30 years, if you just focus on making incremental progress year after year, you can build a hell of a career. And that's really where my mind is at right now.
That's a smart lesson to learn. Another point that I saw that was really good. It's not personal, it's business. Why is that a lie? Why is that, as per your experience, why is that a lie?
Because good luck telling any entrepreneur it's not personal. It's
that's true.
I remember hearing when we started the business, and I have a lot of very smart people who advise me in my network. Some of them are my family members, some of them are close friends, some of them are business executives. And, a lot of times you'll hear, Matt, you can't, look, it's not personal, it's business. It's not personal, it's business. But the truth is there's a connection. Sir Martin Searle, who used to run WPP, he said there's a founder's connection, something he could call it founder's connection, which he said was the closest thing that a male could feel to childbirth, which is if you're a founder of a business, it becomes, the business becomes a living, breathing organism in its own right. So how can you possibly grow, nourish, cultivate a living, breathing organism, which is really what a business is, founder, and not have a personal connection to it. So, rather than just sort of pretend that business isn't personal, I try to embrace it. And my business is very much a personal reflection of who I am. It's a personal reflection of my values. It's a personal reflection of, how I want to treat people. It's a personal reflection of, the mistakes that I've made in many cases. And, I've just kind of come to terms with that. And obviously I've done it in a way, I try to do it in a way where it doesn't compromise my ability to make disciplined business decisions on behalf of the enterprise. But I'm not afraid to share our personal beliefs and core values, because frankly, a lot of times those are the reflection of the founders that started the company. And then as the company scales, the cool thing about businesses is that, success is best when it's shared. So as you scale your business, other people join, and then you learn from those people. And then the personal values and the personality of the business becomes about more than just the founder. Now it becomes about the people who have joined you on the journey. And that's really what we've learned. And when I talk about business not being, business being personal, that's really what I mean. It is a personal reflection in my mind, who I am as an individual, and many of the people who have chosen to join me on this crazy but fun journey over the past 10 years.
I love that. And I also appreciate that, like, the understanding that it's personal, because I think that if somebody ever said to me it's not business, it's personal, it's more a reflection of the fact that they want to mask like a behavior or an action with like a broad stroke of, I don't really care. I don't really care about you, but I'm trying to win on my end anyways, and I'm being selfish. So I listen, business is rough, and there's going to be people that are going to try and screw you over. And I'm sure you've experienced that many times in your career as yeah, you learn it very quickly. And one takeaway, I work with a lot of, I used to work more, but I still get a lot of entrepreneurs reaching out, and just for, advice on this and that and the other thing. And how do I take my product to market? And I'm looking for a co-founder, and I'm looking, I don't want to bootstrap. I want to get some VC money. And the best advice, that I always give them is to make sure you align with the right people. And don't jump into bed with people too quickly. And that could be co-founder, that could be wrong VC, it could be, it could be dumb money that's not going to help you. It could be people that are a little more predatory in their view of how to build business and exit. Like people drive business, and people can ruin business too. And I think that as a first-time entrepreneur, you're probably a little bit more naive to it, to how stressful, or I don't want to say bad people can be, but people can be very bad. And if you've only ever worked under the umbrella of a corporation before, you'll never realize it until you go out on your own. You try to build your own thing. So
no, I agree with you, Scott. I totally agree with you. I would say about 98% of the mistakes I've made over the past 10 years have to do with people. And specifically, it has to do with one of the four following areas: people I hired, people I didn't hire, people I fired, and people I didn't fire. So what's the common thread there? It's people. And then that I handle myself in any one of those four one of those four categories, my greatest mistakes and regrets usually have to come with, usually revolve around people front and center. And that I'm sure that is the experience, not just with myself, but of any entrepreneur listening to this. I think you also hit on a very important point, which has to do with cynicism. And, that's another lesson that I learned quickly. I have a lesson in my book called The Man Who Slept in the Conference Room. And it has to do with cynicism. I was like a month or two into business, and I found out that there's some bad people out there in business, and you have to sort of scrutinize things a little bit more closely than you're used to. You have to vet things properly. And, the Man Who Slept in the Conference Room, we had this guy who, who positioned himself as like a super, super successful titan of industry, out in Europe, and he was working out of the shared office we were in at the time. And anyhow, long story short, I totally fell for his pitch, hook, line, and sinker. And he convinced me to provide pro bono services and get behind him and all this philanthropy he was doing. Anyway, long story short, it turned out that this guy was a total fraud. And he wound up in our conference room. He said he had this big penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It turned out that, he couldn't even afford rent. He was sleeping in our conference room and all these kind of crazy things. And it just taught me a valuable lesson very early in my business career that there's more than meets the eye, right? And you got to vet properly. And people who say they're on top of the world sometimes are not. And you really need to do a good job of making sure that you're vetting things properly.
Yeah, very good. That's a crazy story. I've heard of, you get into bed with the wrong founders, or people don't work as hard, or don't pull their weight. You have some bad VC intentions or what, but I've never heard of somebody sleeping in your conference room because they don't have them.
We found it because we were working rent free out of this shared office space in Midtown, and it was an amazing gesture that one of our early clients gave. He was like, Matt, keep your overhead down. We've got tons of office space. Come work out of our shared office. So he was incredibly gracious. And then another guy who was working out of this office was this guy that I mentioned earlier, and he immediately positioned himself as this super successful titan of industry, had like 3 or 4 exits in the billions of dollars and all this kind of crazy stuff. And he used that to really, and I was a very impressionable first-time entrepreneur. So he used that to convince me to provide services for free. And then anyway, turned out that we wound up, someone didn't pass the sniff test about a month or 2 after all this happened. We started doing some research, found out he was a total fraud. And then when we were moving to our first real office downtown in Tribeca from Midtown, we were cleaning out the conference room. And there was like this, one of my interns actually saw this pillow, and it was like pajamas or something in one of the nooks in the conference table. It was like, what the heck is that? And we opened up the nook, and it turned out that it was the clothes of this guy who said that he was so successful. And we found out later that he had been sleeping in the conference room because he couldn't afford rent. So there you go.
That's interesting. You have to be careful, man. You have to be so careful. I've never, you have to be so careful. I've never experienced anything like that before, but like I was doing some independent consulting, and you have to, because I don't want to talk about me, but I did come from big business, and I experienced that when I went out on my own, and it was never that extreme, but it was definitely just like, it was more like to do with, you have to manage your expectations. How do you get people to pay their invoices after you've done the work? Like the things that you don't have to worry about, like that people don't respect you as a consultant or a business owner. Like these types of regular businessy things, it's just operating a business, and you expect that everything should go easily if you set up a project and you do the work. If you have, I guess that's why people get prepaid and whatnot. But as a new entrepreneur, as somebody just going out on my own and doing my own thing several years ago, that was an issue that I ran into, and how to value my own time properly, because you jump at these deals and then you do the work and then people aren't paying, and then that's just that's a small fraction of somebody committing fraud and sleeping in your conference room and whatnot. But still, these are things you don't deal with when you work for somebody, right? It's not your problem. You have people that take care of that, especially when you work in a large company. So yeah.
Scott, it's an interesting point that you bring up too on that, is that I think that underscores the silver lining in all of this, is that when you find good people, hold on to them. And that's another lesson that I've learned. There's a lot of bad people in business, unfortunately, and you're right. A lot of what you just hit on are signs of value. Do you pay your vendors on time, right? Do you treat people the right way? Are you diligent in follow-up, or do you only follow up with people when you want something from them in return? Like all of these are usually signs of character and ultimately some sort of connection to the values of the enterprise. Well, business is personal because it's usually a reflection in some way, shape, or form of the personal values of the collection of people who are running those enterprises. But the silver lining is that there's also some great people out there. And when you find good people, hold on to them, keep them. And a lot of the mistakes I talked about, the mistakes I made in my career, usually have to do with people. A lot of the mistakes too have to do with losing people that were good people that, I wish I could have kept if I would have done a thing or two probably differently. And good people lead you to great places. That's very true in business. That's very true. And I think no matter where you are in your career, whether you're an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, surround yourself with good people, and because there's a lot of bad people there. So when you find a good one, hold on.
I love it. It's a good takeaway. And the last point that I want to touch on. I've gone through a ton of stuff in the book and a lot of really good stories, so I appreciate it. But there's one more point. You mentioned entrepreneurs are never self-made. What does that mean? Because that's going to piss off a lot of people that are saying, "Yeah, I did the work. I made myself. I built myself up." So what do you mean by that? And I understand. I understand slightly what you're saying, but I want to hear from you. So what do you mean entrepreneurs are never self-made?
So I learned that, I was, again, when I started our business, I was very naive, Scott. And one of my goals was, and it's very personal. A lot of the lessons in the book obviously are very personal. It's a journey through 10 years of my entrepreneur experience and all the mistakes I made and whatnot. And when I started the business, I thought that I was going to build myself into this self-made millionaire very early in life. Before age 30, that was one of the goals I had set for myself. And, fortunately, through hard work, I was able to achieve, my financial goal before the age of 30, which for me was like a huge accomplishment. And it meant a lot. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like I'm a self-made guy and here I am. And then I heard a speech by Ken Langone, who was the founder of Home Depot. I was about 30, 31 years old or something like that at the time. And he talked about how there's no such thing, and he's a billionaire. Home Depot co-founder of the whole thing. Really the epitome of the American dream. And he talked about how he didn't view himself as self-made. And I was like, well, how is that possible? Here's a guy from Long Island, right around the area I grew up, working class family, built himself, into all of this success without really, any kind of head start in life. And he doesn't view himself as self-made. And then he explained why. And when he explained why, I was like, oh, absolutely, that makes perfect sense. The reason you're not self-made is because you're the byproduct of so many people in your career who have helped you, and they've paid it forward. And they might not necessarily pay it forward in the form of money, but they pay it forward in the form of something that's much more valuable than money. That's time, that's support, and that's care. And that's sort of when that's when the light bulb went off, and any sort of, small level of success I had achieved at that point in my career, I realized was not the result of my own doing. It was more the result of just being blessed with great people around me that believed in me, supported me, donated their time, contributed their support. And that's why I was self-made. I wasn't self-made because I had any kind of brilliant formula. I was self-made because I was just the byproduct of all these great people who believed in me. I think that's an important lesson. I think it should help any entrepreneur, anyone who's on their career journey, keep things in perspective. Any success you achieve, obviously, it's on you to get there, but you're not going to get there unless you have the support of others.
And I think that the one thing, if I can add on to that, is to keep that in the back of your mind so you stay humble too. So you do stay humbled as you grow, because you mentioned like it's people that drive it. It's people that drive your success. And if you ever forget that, that's when I think that's when you could make poor decisions about people that are good people, because you don't understand how these people got you to where you were. And if you do want to ever get to the next level, it's still going to be those people, mentors, employees, peers. It doesn't really matter. There's a whole bunch of people that impact and help your success. I think that those people do have to,
Look at what we were talking about earlier about the survival days. And when I was sitting in that diner in Yonkers and I asked my wife for her blessing, and she said, start the business. She would have said no. There goes my dream, right?
Yeah.
So, and she hasn't contributed, my wife has contributed everything to me since, this whole thing started, my journey started, but she hasn't contributed any money, but she contributed, to my mind, the most important gift of all, which is belief and support. So how could I possibly be self-made if she didn't make the decision to let me start the firm?
Very good. So they're really good. Those are really good lessons. I hope that people that are listening, if they are entrepreneurs, or like I said, entrepreneurs, people looking to grow in their career, could have a side hustle, could just want to, get to the next level of their career. I would suggest reading this book, because these are all very, very personal stories. And I've personally worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, but I've also, gone through different stages in my career. And I can say that a lot of the books will speak about, I guess, the tactics or the high level, but they don't get into the some of the negatives or the parts of being an entrepreneur or business or life that are a little bit less fun to deal with. And you can learn a lot about strategy and tactics in a lot of books that people, write about marketing and sales and culture and management and leadership, but they don't always go into the negatives, because that's something that's hard to write about, and it's very personal, and a lot of people don't like to share those stories. And sometimes you only see those stories shared when somebody's like already like, a billionaire, and they'll write a memoir of all the things they've gone through in their life. But I really appreciate that. And, this book is really good for highlighting the real life experience of an entrepreneur. Actually, another book that I've actually read that is similar to this is like The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is also very much like raw. I guess the best word is raw. It's just like, it's not bullshitting. It's not, it's not fake. It's not phony. It's just like, this is what you're going to have to deal with if you want to go and really achieve greatness. There's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of positives, but there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind. Not drawbacks, not always negatives, but just things like you have to keep in mind. This is what people have been through before. This is what you're going to have to deal with. And I think that that's really probably the most valuable lessons you can ever give someone. Just like the reality of what it is to build your own thing. But anyways, I wanted to I've been speaking way too much on this podcast, so I apologize. But I get really excited about some of the topics that you're talking about. I wanted to give you the floor. Are there any other lessons inside this book that you thought would be really good? We sort of spoke about a ton of stuff, but is there anything else that you sort of learned that we didn't touch on that you'd want to bring up, or is this good? It's your whatever. Floor is yours, man.
We still have about 88 lessons to go, so I don't know.
So when we're all, pandemic's over, like New York's like my second home, so we'll do a sit down, and we'll do an in-person. We'll have like a series of going through your life, going through these lessons, probably understanding all the shit you went through. That just it's going to be a little bit traumatic for you, reliving all these experiences again and speaking through them. But I think it's really good for people to hear out.
I guess I'll just share two real quickly. One is one is sort of a practical tip that I learned that I think your audience can apply in their day-to-day, whether they're entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, or just sort of figuring out what they want to do in their career. And then one is a little bit more personal. The tactical one is I call it foul shots, and I've been taking what I call foul shots for my whole career. And the concept of foul shots is based on, the late Kobe Bryant. I remember hearing about his just incredibly insane work ethic, and how he would stay after practice every day, and he would shoot hundreds and hundreds of shots, and he wouldn't allow himself to leave practice until he hit, I think it was like 400 or 500 shots, or something insane. And talking about incrementalism like we did earlier, the thought being, Scott, that he's not going to go from being a 38% to a 48% shooter overnight, right? The difference of one day of taking those shots is not going to make him a superstar. But what is the discipline of taking those shots every single day, and over the course of the year in aggregate, those shots will make him a better shooter and thus a better player. So I thought it was just such a cool way of, and I wanted to adopt that into my own repertoire and work. So I did what I started. I started taking what I call foul shots, and every day, I've done this since I was about 21 or 22 years old. I would just reach out to somebody, and it could be somebody that I read about in the newspaper. It could be somebody that I had seen on TV. It could be somebody that one of my friends told me about. And I would just reach out to them for no really selfish reason or commercial gain. It was just someone who interested me. And I said, hey, Scott, read about you in this magazine, really inspired by your journey. Thought, A, B, and C about your journey was really cool. Would love to grab a coffee sometime, something like that. Anyhow, I did that about 5 to 10 of those per day when I started my career. And I've done it every single day for my entire career. And the thought being, similar to the Kobe work ethic, is that if I reach out to 5 new people every day, probably not going to make a difference on a day-to-day basis, but that means that's 25 people per week. It's 100 new people per month. It's 1,000 new people per year. I've been in business for 10 years now. That's 10,000 people. And, even if 20% of those people respond to you, it changes the course of your career because you meet new people that lead you to great places. And the whole thought is that if you take those foul shots every day, it's the repetition that will really impact your career. So that's one, piece of advice, and it's a lesson in the book. And I actually share in the book foul shots I've taken and how they've changed the whole direction of my career. They've led me to game-changing, life-changing financial opportunities. They've brought me to new friends, that to this day hold a very, special place in my heart. And I would have never had those opportunities if I didn't take foul shots.
I love that. Yeah.
Another lesson, and I think this is the most important one, is just, I mentioned earlier, good people lead you to great places. That's a lesson I mentioned in the book. And that's the most important one, I think, to me, because your career, just like your life, is not a straight line. It's a curvy line, very unpredictable. You're going to get knocked on your butt so many times. And it's really how you respond to that adversity, I think, that counts. And you just want to go through those curves with people who you respect, people who you care about, and people who respect you. So if there's anything, I've learned, any small lesson I've learned, I think, in the past 10 years, it's been that the better the people that I've surrounded myself with, the better places I found myself, in and going to. And that's a lesson that I think is really important. And if I was starting my career out today, knowing what I know now, I would tell myself, don't worry so much about money. Don't worry so much about, the name of the company you're working for, whose name is on the door. Worry about the people that you're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis, because usually the better the people you're around, the better the places you're going to find yourself.
That's great. That really does tee up most of the questions that I had. And one of the questions that I usually ask is, what's the one life lesson that you would tell your younger self? Would that be it? Would that be the one that you would probably tell your younger self if you could, out of everything that you've written about and learned over your career?
Yeah, that would be one. And, I also that would probably be the most important one, I think, for me, Scott. The other thing is, losses, learn from losses. You're going to lose so many times in business. Learn from those. Each time you lose, force yourself to study the losses, the more you study your losses, the better you can improve in the future. And also, I think, celebrate winning moments. That's another thing I talk about in the book. I probably have some regret. I definitely have some regret over the past 10 years for not celebrating winning moments as much as I should. This is a beautiful journey. Your career is a beautiful journey, and you're going to have a lot of winning moments too. Financially, winning moments. You're going to have, winning client outcomes. You're going to meet people and, sharing winning moments together. And I think a lot of my regret comes from probably not spending as much time sharing in those moments and celebrating those moments with people who have contributed to them with me. And I think that's something I would probably tell myself.
Very good. Very good. And the last question I have would be, what would be a resource? It could be a podcast, a book, an Audible. It could be a person that you would recommend people go check out if you were going to say, this is where I learn, or this is where I go to, improve myself. What would that resource be?
Well, look, I don't mean to skate around that question, but you have to be a constant consumer, I think, of intelligence and media. And I know that I'll pull little bits and pieces from so many different podcasts, one of them being yours, by the way, Scott, and, so many others. And
you don't have to plug my podcast, but I appreciate it.
And I think, look, I think that you should really apply those data points in your own way. And, I just read, for example, Ray Dalio's book, Principles. That's like an 800-page book or something. And I love the book, by the way. Am I going to apply all 800 pages of it to my journey? Probably not. But am I going to take certain elements of that and get better and apply it? For sure. And then, Scott Galloway, who is a longtime, mentor and client, of mine, who's now has a great podcast with Kara Swisher. I've learned a lot from him as well. Anyway, my approach to consumption is just, you have to be addicted to information and data, and then consume as much as that as you possibly could, and then put your own spin on it. It's you to be the judge and jury of that. And how you
I think that's a smart answer. It's not skating away or skating around it at all. It's a very smart way to look at consumption of knowledge and improving yourself. And That's probably more useful than if you can tee that up for somebody and they can internalize that concept. That's going to be more useful than name dropping a book for sure. I think that people just have to get into the mindset of always wanting to learn and always being curious. I think that that's probably the best way to approach life. And if you can sort of, if you can make that part of what makes you happy and something that provides, satisfaction, like learning and improving and curiosity and taking all those different data points from all these different sources and having the mind also to filter what's relevant to you and how to apply it. You can listen to, 100 very smart PhD billionaire, unicorn startup founder, CEO, but understand the lesson that, and that's kind of really what this podcast is all about. Like there's a wide range of people that I bring on here, but I try and draw out like the tactical from each one of them relative to what they've done in their career. And hopefully somebody listening can understand that message as well and take that one piece from that one individual and apply it to what their instance or their particular set of circumstances is. That's really the best way to learn. That's how I learn. And I think that's very, very smart. Well said. How do people get in touch with you? Where do they go to, check out your book? I'm assuming Amazon, but outside of that, where's your website, N6A's website, LinkedIn, whatever?
Sure. So check us out on n6a.com. That has all information about our clients and our corporate culture. If you're interested in a career with N6A, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn if I can be helpful at all. Obviously, for your listeners, if they need discounted access to the book, we're happy to do that. In fact, just given it's so funny, Scott, when I published the book, it was like the week before COVID started. You talk about timing.
It's not a good time.
So the beginning of the next book, which I want to write a book the next 10 years, based on the second kind of 10 years of my entrepreneurial career, it's going to start literally the first chapter is going to open up and then the world changed, which is literally where, the first day of the second chapter of my career, I guess, began. But when we went into COVID, we made a decision to donate all profits and proceeds from the book to COVID relief funds. So any book sales are going straight to that.
That's all for today. Thanks again for joining me on another episode of the Success Story Podcast. You can download or stream this podcast wherever podcasts are available, including iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many others. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe and share this podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, and peers. Please leave us a rating on iTunes. It takes about 30 seconds as it allows other people to find our podcast and lets our amazing guests reach even more people with their message. And remember, any rating is fine as long as it contains 5 stars. I'm Scott Clary from the Success Story Podcast, signing off.